Coming up on this edition of Tider Insider TV, 2 Crimson Tide players have been suspended by Nick Saban while another is not expected to return. We'll have the very latest on these developing events. Also ahead, some will call him a transfer, others will call him a traitor. We'll discuss what's being labeled as Cory Grant's defection to Auburn. And former Tide softball assistant Van Studeman is ringing the cowbells in Starkville now. Find out why she is the new Mississippi State head coach and what she had to say about how long it'll take to beat Alabama. Tider Insider TV starts right now.
Go inside the Crimson Tide. Tider Insider TV with Rodney Orr and Gary Harris.
Let's begin on a positive note. Good news report for Alabama gymnast Kayla Hoffman. She's been named the SEC's Female Athlete of the Year. In addition to the national championship, she led the Tide to 2011 SEC and NCAA regional titles, giving Bama its first Triple Crown since 1988. Earlier today, Coach Sarah Patterson talked about her star athlete.
When she came in, she was a talented athlete, but she wasn't necessarily the best competitor. And I think to see how she's taken her talents, her charisma, her lines, all her artistic ability, and has used that over the 4 years, but then has become a competitor that is a true champion, I think that's the mark of a truly exceptional athlete.
And the other big story we're following broke just before our 5 o'clock news today. Nick Saban announcing that redshirt freshman wide receiver Kewan Malone and sophomore defensive lineman Darrington Centimore have been suspended indefinitely from the Crimson Tide team. Saban says it's because the players violated team rules and policy. Also, the coach announcing that senior defensive back Robbie Green, who sat out 2010 because of a suspension, will not return to the team in 2011. With all that news already, we say good evening and welcome in to Tider Insider TV. I'm happy to be back alongside Rodney Orr from TiderInsider.com. I'm Gary Harris. Our program sponsored each and every week by Buffalo Rock. Tonight, ice cold Pepsi. You know, sometimes we go with the diet, but after a week away, I felt like I'd go with the leaded versus the unleaded. And let's start at the beginning, and so much to cover tonight, Rodney, but the news that Centimore had been suspended comes on the heels of reports last week that he was considering a transfer possibly to the University of Miami. So, Rodney, I guess first off is he's suspended. He's reportedly looking at a transfer. Is there any chance that Darrington Centimore will play football at Alabama in 2011?
Well, you know, again, apparently that's possible. He's only been indefinitely suspended, so there's nothing definite, obviously, that he's leaving. There's been talk about him, as you mentioned, going to Miami, Gary. There's also been talk in the coaching circles throughout several defensive line coaches that I've spoken to that he may end up in junior college. But, you know, again, it's only an indefinite suspension at this point.
Centimore a little undersized, only, what would you say, 275 pounds maybe?
Probably.
But can run, can get to the quarterback, got a lot of athletic ability. His best football is in front of him, regardless of who he plays for. Now, Kewan Malone, fast wide receiver out of Memphis. Again, a little undersized for his position. Needs to gain some weight, but he can run, he can catch. He's a good route runner. But you had heard through the grapevine, so to speak, that he might be in a little hot water, and certainly that is the case with him.
Yep, and again, I thought he had a good A-Day game, made some nice catches. Of course, he lost the ball there at the end a couple of times, but he has a lot of potential, Gary. He's a really playmaking little guy, and was looking forward to seeing him play this year, and hopefully they get everything worked out, and both those guys can get back on the field for Alabama. For a couple of guys whose best football is probably in front of them, a lot of potential to a guy who's proven it on the field. 2 years ago, Robbie Green was a crucial contributor in the secondary to a team that won 12 games. Sat out last year, but hopes were high that he would return to safety at Alabama in 2011, but now he's gone. Yep, and again, he missed last year, obviously, for that suspension. Came back. It was hopeful that he could come back this year and be the Robbie Green that he was a couple of years ago, and it just didn't happen. And it's unfortunate, but certainly hope he does well, whatever he does.
Well, and let me ask you about that, Rodney. I guess there is a chance that he could still transfer somewhere and play one more year? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, probably
a
small
school.
Yeah, small school. I guess it's possible. Again, it would be up to what Robbie Green decided he wanted to do.
We wish him the best. I wish all these guys the best, and certainly for Centimore and Malone, still an opportunity. If they could do what they need to do to get back on the football team at Alabama, we, of course, will keep you up to date on this story. Well, we talked a few weeks ago about running back Cory Grant's decision to transfer from Alabama. What we didn't know for sure was his destination. We had heard some rumors, and turns out the rumors were right. The Opelika native has enrolled at Auburn. and will be a member of the Tigers football team this fall, although he will have to sit out per NCAA rules and won't play until 2012. Grant says he doesn't leave Alabama with any hard feelings, but that he simply felt like he would be a better fit at Auburn. Now, Rodney, you follow this recruiting story very, very closely. Coming out of Opelika High School, a lot of people felt like he would sign with Auburn, particularly with the fact that they wanted to spread it out. And I hate to use the term scat back because I really don't like that term, but he's a multi-purpose back that seemingly would fit better in that type of offense than the pro-style offense that Alabama runs in the first place. But he decided to sign with the Crimson Tide, but didn't stick around long. Yeah, I think he thought, Gary could come here and be that maybe that third down back, kind of like the role that Roy Upchurch had filled, maybe return kicks. And when he got here, they tried to give him an opportunity, give him a look at cornerback, see if he could fit in there, moved him back to running back. He just never really found a niche. And, of course, we know that Alabama has a lot of talented backs. D. Hart came in this spring, and I think that's kind of a role, Gary, that would be very similar to what Cory Grant would have filled. And I think Cory probably saw the writing on the wall that D. Hart's really good. Still, it's one thing to transfer. It's another thing to transfer to Auburn. It doesn't happen very often. I can think of a couple guys, Roddy Gibson and Victor Horner, that transferred from Auburn to Alabama. I think Chris Browder signed with Alabama in high school, then signed with Auburn out of junior college. Cornelius Griffin signed with Auburn out of high school, then signed with Alabama, was a great player. But this doesn't happen very often. What's going to be the reaction from the Alabama fans when Cory Grant lines up on the field in a couple of years for the Tigers? Well, the question is, will he line up on the field? A lot of those guys you mentioned, of course, Cornelius Griffin and Browder both played for their respective teams. But, again, we'll see what he does, see if Cory Grant can make the lineup down there, so to speak. And, I think, Gary, when you look at Cory Grant, it was just, as you mentioned earlier, I think you hit the nail on the head. Probably he's a better fit for that offensive system than he is Alabama. He's maybe an Ontario McCaleb-type player. We shall see. Well, still to come on TITV, Rodney has his weekly recruiting update and then some. So stay tuned for that. But up next,
7 innings.
New Mississippi State softball coach Van Studeman made some bold predictions about her former team, at least playing her former team, Alabama, last week. Was she playing to the crowd or was she serious? We'll talk about it. Plus, we'll take your phone calls and emails. I know that you're going to be ringing us at 205-348-9882, or if you'd rather, you can email us, TITV@WVUATV.com. Stay tuned because you're watching the show that takes you inside the Crimson Tide, the one, the only Tider Insider TV, presented by Buffalo Rock. We'll talk about landing on your feet. Just over a week after being let go from a position as pitching coach at Alabama, Van Studeman found work as an SEC head coach at rival Mississippi State. She was officially introduced as the leader of the Bulldogs softball program last week. She feels MSU can be a contender right now and that she's the right person to lead the charge.
I have big dreams, I have big ambitions, and I'm ready to go to work. I'm a blue-collar worker. I have been on all levels, and I know what it takes to build a successful program.
How long is it going to take you to beat Alabama?
7 innings.
Kind of sounds like the old Pat Dye line. How long is it going to take to beat Alabama? 4 quarters. Yeah. But, you got to be happy for Van Studeman, a longtime pitching coach here for Patrick Murphy. Then when Murphy and Allison Habits briefly went to LSU, they did not take Studeman with them. And then when Coach Murphy came back, she was relieved of her duties. But as I said, talk about landing on your feet.
You think that was a planted question?
I don't know, but I think that answer had definitely been thought about if she got an opportunity to work it in there. But great person, did a good job here. You have to be happy for her, but at the same time, you can tell she's going to have a little bit of an axe to grind against Alabama. And when, of course, they're arguably the top program in the conference anyway, so it'll be an interesting rivalry now between Alabama and Mississippi State. Yeah, it will be. She's got her hands full there. Yeah. Trying to build that program. Yeah, I think that she's got some work to do if she's going to beat Alabama in 7 innings, 9 innings, or any amount of innings. But we're happy for Van Studeman, no doubt about that. Well, coming up, Rodney updates you on several top prospects in terms of football and where Alabama stands on their respective list. And later, he'll tell you who some of the Tide's top remaining targets are for the upcoming 2012 class. But we're going to get to your phone calls next as well. 205-348-WVUA, that's 348-9882, or you can email us to the email address on your screen. Stick around, we've got all that plus some news on the late Alabama and Tennessee football player Aaron Douglas coming up. Stay with us. According to the Florida Medical Examiner's report, Alabama football offensive tackle Aaron Douglas died as the result of multiple drugs in his system. His death was officially ruled an accident. Douglas had been attending a house party near Jacksonville, Florida, while on vacation back in May. His body was found the next morning on a second-floor balcony. He was obviously found deceased, and the good news is it was an accident. And certainly, as always, our condolences go out to his friends, family, and teammates. All right, time to talk some football recruiting. And Rodney, the attention for Quan Alexander has been intense for a while. It's only going to get hotter, but is there any reason to believe when it's all is said and done, this won't be an Alabama-Auburn battle?
Well, I mean, maybe Florida State, I don't know. But, at this point, Gary, I think Quan's probably, Alabama has a lead, has probably had a lead. But again, those other schools certainly a threat. He named his top 12 here recently. Schools like Oklahoma also in the mix. So he's not really tipping his hand, but I think Alabama's still in pretty good shape. All
right, Quan, the outstanding linebacker from Oxford, nearby Cleveland County High School, which produced Alabama stars Todd Bates and Tyrone Prothero, has one of those sleeper prospects, if you will, in Rocky Hayes, a quarterback who's garnered a lot of attention as of late. And head coach Mike Short said this guy's the real deal.
Yep, and Cleveland County also produced Gary Harris. But Rocky Hayes, Gary, kind of came out of nowhere. I reported a couple of weeks ago on TiderInsider.com to watch out for Rocky Hayes. He was a guy that was emerging and had an excellent camp at Alabama here a couple of weeks ago, ran the fastest time among the defensive backs, according to what Rocky tells me. And he's coming back down here on July 17th for an unofficial visit. Alabama hasn't offered, but watch out for Alabama and Auburn. Could possibly both offer. Grew up an Auburn fan, Gary, but interestingly enough said if he had to pick today, even though it's real close, he said he'd pick Alabama.
All right, Geno Smith from Atlanta, no doubt he's got a top talent, but who's his favorite team this week?
Well, I don't know. We talked to him earlier this week, and Alabama and Auburn are his top two, though he says he hasn't ruled out other schools. Certainly Georgia was one of the ones that he mentioned, among others, but when it comes down to it, who really knows what he's going to do? I know that Alabama is a team that's been seriously in the mix. Auburn, obviously, has been very strongly in the mix with Trooper Taylor recruiting him.
Hayes and Smith, good players, but they don't have the size that Travell Dixon has out of Miami. You're talking 6'2", 190 at the cornerback position. That's big.
Yep, and he's a junior college player at Eastern Arizona Community College, and he is a native of Miami. Gary's a #1 junior college defensive back or #1 cornerback in the country, has over 45 offers. That's a lot of offers for anyone, especially a junior college player. Talked to Travell last night. Alabama, he loves Nick Saban. Very high on the coaching staff here. Jim McElwain's recruiting him. Alabama's in great shape with Travell Dixon. Will make an unofficial visit on July 17th. Then he's going to make an official visit to Alabama in November for the LSU game. And again, he's a guy, Gary, that could graduate in December and be here in the spring. How big is that?
Big. Now, oftentimes with offensive tackles projecting what they're going to be like down the road, that would certainly seem to be the case with Andrew Jelks out of Tennessee because he's only 262 pounds.
Yep, Andrew, here's the deal with him. He made an unofficial visit here last week, had a great time. We had a story on that this morning on TiderInsider.com. And the problem is Andrew's grown up this huge Tennessee fan right in the middle of Big Orange country, and it's going to be very difficult for anyone to get him away from Tennessee. But again, he was impressed with Alabama. We'll see what happens.
And Shaq Rowland, a wide receiver out of South Carolina, has got excellent size and speed.
Jadeveon Clowney, Stephon Gilmore, Marcus Lattimore, all those guys were top players in the state of South Carolina. All of them talked big about leaving, and then guess what? They stayed in South Carolina. Guys used to exit that state on a regular basis. We'll see what Shaq Rowland does. I talked to his coach last week. He said Alabama is definitely a very legitimate contender for Shaq Rowland. Said it would be between Alabama and South Carolina. Would he stay home or would he leave? That was the only question. Gary is a guy who scored 39 touchdowns last year.
And is it Florida or Alabama for Chris Black out of Jacksonville?
Well, it might be Florida State.
Wow.
It's probably Alabama and Florida State for Chris Black. I think right now, though, Gary, look at the hat he's wearing. That's a little elephant up there. That's not a Seminole. So I think right now Alabama's a team that's in front. And he's a great player. Some people would consider him the #2 wide receiver in the country behind Dorial Green-Beckham. So that'd be a huge pickup for Alabama.
Indeed. And coming up later in the show, Rodney will tell us who he thinks Alabama's top targets remaining for the class of 2012 are. Right now, though, we're going to take some phone calls. Joseph is first up tonight in Tuscaloosa. Joseph, welcome in.
How you doing, Gary?
Doing well, Joseph.
Yeah, I got one question. I noticed I was at the Bear Brown Museum the other week, and I noticed when Cornelius Bennett made that hit when they were playing against Notre Dame. And our question is, when are we going to, is there any chance that maybe in a couple of years we're going to play Notre Dame again?
Well, I think that's a series or rivalry, whatever you want to refer to it as, that both schools would probably at some point like to have back on top or on tap. I think they've talked about it in the past and maybe even had some tentative thoughts of putting it together, but it's just so hard to schedule. But yeah, I think it's something we can see in the future.
Yeah, and you would hope as an Alabama fan that series could possibly be scheduled when Alabama's good, because they have some ground to make up, Gary. 1-5 overall against Notre Dame.
Yeah.
How many national championships they cost Alabama? Two?
Yeah, those first 4 games could have gone either way. Unfortunately, they went Notre Dame's way every time.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned the Cornelius Bennett tackle. That's the only one Alabama won in 1986 over Notre Dame at Legion Field. All right, let's go to West Blockton and talk to Trey. Trey, welcome in. How are you?
Hey, good. How are y'all?
Good.
Welcome back, Gary.
Thank you, Trey.
Rodney, I know last week you touched on relative to another caller's comment or question or whatever about probable early playing time for select few 2011 recruits or whatever.
Right.
I know I was going to add a name, of course, Bradley Sills. He could come in and, contribute fairly early, but I was sticking on the offensive side of the ball. Is he likely to be the first guy to hit the field, maybe even ahead of like D. Hart, another guy, considering Sills' looseness and his top end speed?
Thank you, Trey. And we're watching video of Silv right now. He can fly.
Yeah. Well, Trey, let me put it to you this way. Again, I don't know what's going to happen. We'll have to wait until August and kind of get a better idea. But if he gets on the field quicker than D. Hart, it's probably going to be because he's returning the opening kickoff. And maybe D. Hart might be back there on to return the opening kickoff. We'll see. But, Bradley Silva, I could see him possibly returning kickoffs. But, again, would he get on the field as a wide receiver before D. Hart gets on the field as a back, specialty back? We'll see.
All right, let's get one more phone call before we go to break. Let's talk to John in Bessemer. John, you're on the program.
Hey, man, what's going on? Roll Tide.
Hey, John.
Hey, man, do y'all remember David Palmer?
Just a little bit, yeah.
Can Alabama get a player like him next year?
Well, John, I don't know what you'd say other than David Palmer is a once-in-a-generation type player, if you ask me. I mean, he wasn't the fastest guy, but his combination of eyesight, quickness, elusiveness, football instincts, could throw it, could catch it, could run with it. I don't know that, you'd like to think so, but I don't know if you'll ever see another talent just like David Palmer. He was kind of unique.
Return punts, you mentioned that. Return kickoffs, line up at quarterback, under the center, in the gun, wide receiver, tailback, whatever you need. He could have probably been an outstanding cornerback. I know he's a great tackler in high school, great defender on that side of the ball, and a guy that a lot of people forget that Ole Miss game, Gary. They remember the runs he made in that game in '93, but how about the throw he made to Kevin Lee, 55 yards in the air on the spot.
So to answer your question, you hope you could find another David Palmer, but you never know. He was a special talent. Coming up, more of your phone calls and emails. Our phone lines are open, so give us a call right now. And as we go to break, Tider Insider TV summer previews are beginning next week. Alabama's schedule, we'll break it down. You see the games and the opponents that we'll look at each week, and we'll kind of give you our idea on how we think the Tide will finish out over the next 3 weeks. So make sure and stay with us for that. Welcome back to TITV, presented by Buffalo Rock, alongside Rodney Orr from TiderInsider.com. I'm Gary Harris. Let's go back to the phones and talk with John in Helena. John, welcome into the program. How are you?
Hey, I'm fine, thank you.
Good.
I was just curious as to why we build a 100,000-seat stadium and we play our biggest games, the games that we want to see in Texas, like I think we're playing Michigan there next year, and Virginia Tech the following year,
right,
in Georgia. Why don't we play those? I know it's a one and done, but why don't we play those games in our big stadium?
Right, John, and you're right onto something there. They are one and done type games. They're promotional games, and they're not scheduled to be home and home series. You get one crack at Michigan, Texas Stadium, Jerry Jones, whomever puts up the money to get these games in there. Chick-fil-A puts it up in Atlanta, and that's why I do think the effort here is to in the home schedule each year, outside the SEC games. Now you're going to get all your big SEC games at home every other year. LSU, Auburn, and come here, but. The games like Michigan, Virginia Tech, those one-and-done games are neutral site games. That's just the way
and again, you're talking about, are you going to start a home-and-home series with a program like Notre Dame or Penn State? They played Penn State here last year. That was a big game, though Penn State's a little bit down. Of course, they go back up there this year. When you look at those games, though, Gary, the ones he's talking about, those are very valuable games because it gives you an opportunity to get in that game where you've got a lot of exposure, playing against a team maybe that you don't always play, like a Michigan or even Virginia Tech a couple of years ago. And when you're playing in Atlanta, that's an area where you recruit. You go to Texas, you get an exposure out in Texas, so it gives you an opportunity in that area to recruit as well.
All right, absolutely. We got to get to a break. Phone caller, I'm sorry. You want to talk about Gunnar Kiel? We're going to talk about him next as Rodney has a look at some of the top remaining targets on the offensive side of the ball, which include Gunnar Kiel. Stay tuned for that when Tider Insider TV continues. Alabama's already filling up its recruiting class for 2012. With that in mind, we've got Orr's opinion on some of the top remaining offensive targets for the Tide.
Yeah, Gary, I want to be clear on that. It's just an opinion. Certainly, Dorial Green-Beckham, the great wide receiver from Springfield, Missouri, 6'6", 220. You just don't have a lot of guys that come around like him, Gary, with that combination of size and speed. Alabama, Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Notre Dame are some of the schools mentioned. I think Alabama's in really good shape with him. I mentioned there are 2 more offensive tackles. I don't know exactly who they're going to be. They're in on a lot of offensive linemen. They need to get 2 quality offensive tackles. They're in a dire situation in terms of needs there. Russell Shell's the great running back from Tony Dorsett's high school, Gary. I love the guy. I think he's Mark Ingram, but with more speed. There you see the 2 quarterbacks there at the bottom, Gunnar Kiel, Jameis Winston from Hueytown, Gunnar Kiel, of course, from Columbus, Indiana. I think Gunnar Kiel's close to making a decision. Alabama, Oklahoma, Missouri, and possibly Indiana. But I think Alabama's looking pretty good with Gunnar right now, and Jameis as well.
All right, good stuff, Rodney. I'm glad to be back on Tider Insider TV. Ran into some big Titv fans down in Destin last week. All right, it's dinner time. Tonight we're headed to Buddy's Rib and Steak in Northport. Why don't you come out and join us about 7:15? And don't forget, if you missed any of the show, you can find it on our website, WVUATV.com. So for Rodney, I'm Gary. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week. Have a great evening, everybody.